Hello and welcome to everyone listening to the Written Melanin podcast, the place where you come to get your weekly dose of melanated creativity. I'm your host, CM Lockhart, an author of fantasy books featuring Black girls who aren't all that nice, and the owner of the Melanin Library, an online database of books written by Black authors. And in this space, I share with you everything I've learned on my journey as a Black and indie author. I'm glad you're here. And today, you guys, we have Kelis Rowe on the podcast with us. She is a stay-at-home mom and former homeschooler who writes sweeping classic teen novels from the points of view of Black girls who are stronger than they know and the Black teen boys who just gotta love them. Her debut novel, Finding Jupiter, is a contemporary literary romance about an introverted artist and poet and a champion swimmer who bond through shared grief and fall in love one fateful summer. It incorporates journal pages of art and found poetry from the pages of classic novels, including The Great Gatsby and Their Eyes Were Watching God. Finding Jupiter is a Junior Library Guild Gold Standard Selection, September 2023 pick for the Assembly on Literature for Adolescents ALAN Review, a Bank Street Best Children's Book of 2023, and the 2023-2024 winner of the Keystone to Reading Book Award in the high school category. Perfect for fans of everything, love, and basketball, and anything ever written by Liara Tamani and Beyonce. Welcome to the podcast, Kelis.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm glad to have you. So for those of you who are listening to the podcast, if you are unaware, so I actually met on a panel for the Lifted Book Festival earlier this year, and we had a really great conversation. So I'm really glad that you guys get to actually meet her and hear her, and it's going to be great. It's going to be great. So instead of me rambling, Kelis, if you could please, in your own words, aside from your bio, introduce yourself to our listeners, we can get this thing going.
Yeah, I'm Kelis Rowe. I'm a debut author. This is my second year out. My debut novel will be 2 years old on May 31st. And it's still surreal. Yeah, the whole experience is still very surreal. And I'm just really happy to be here.
I'm glad that you are. So let's talk about this, right? Because I think your journey is something that we don't really get to see a whole lot in publishing or traditional publishing, because there's this idea that, you know, once you put out a book, you have to just keep going. It's just like this race to just go, drop a book every year. And next Friday, your book is going to be 2 years old.
Yeah.
And that's your debut. So what has your publishing journey been like, and what has it been like to, you know, be a debut for 2 years?
Yeah, I can tell you that I did not expect to be here. When I wrote Finding Jupiter, it was like a passion project. I had been a homeschooler, a reluctant homeschooler. Actually, my son was born with a spinal cord condition. And so, yeah, I'd been a stay-at-home mom and homeschooler 7 years after I'd been working in my field, after I graduated from college. So my career was cut short. My career was in market research. And so when my son went to school, I stopped homeschooling. He went to public school. I kind of had this moment where I was like, okay, I've been out of my field too long. I can't go back to work. And so who am I? What am I going to do with my life? And so I'd been a blogger. You know, I've been a creative writer my entire life. And so I was like, well, maybe this is a good time to write a book. You know, that book that everybody asked, you know, you should write a book. We like your voice. When are you going to write a book? And so in 2015, I kind of got the spark, you know, the idea to write a book. I wrote it, but because I knew that I was writing a classic love story about two Black American teenagers, importantly, and also that it was not, you know, a topic book. It wasn't about social justice. You know, it wasn't about racism. All the things that were really hot in YA, particularly, you know, surrounding romance at the time, I was just going to self-publish on Amazon. I did all this research and figured out how to self-publish on Amazon, make lots of money. I wouldn't have to show my face because I was also very shy. I'm a hermit, and it was going to be perfect. And then I ran across Pitch Wars. I think you remember Pitch Wars?
Mm-hmm.
On Twitter.
When Twitter was still Twitter.
Yeah, when Twitter was still Twitter. Yeah, rest in peace.
Yeah.
But I ran across that contest and I was just like, you know what? Why not? Why not? Because I knew I was writing a quiet love story and I knew that it would need to be amplified in order to get eyes on it. because nobody was really checking, in publishing especially, nobody was checking for, Black American love stories, teen love stories at the time. Super growing space now, but we're here. So yeah, entered the contest, did really well. I feel like there was some timing involved with the George Floyd's murder. I feel like across entertainment, everybody was kind of like, we entertain ourselves a lot with Black pain. We need Black joy, right?
Yeah.
So my book did really well at auction, and I'm here. One thing I did do, because I'm not a person who was just poised to crank books out, was before I signed my contract, I did tell my editor, it took me 3 years to write Finding Jupiter, and I didn't think I would write another book. So that's why I put everything that I loved in that one book. And so I was like, I don't know if I can write another book. Are you sure you want 2 books from me? So I signed a 2-book deal, and with them knowing that it takes me forever to write books. And here we are, 2 years out. The second book is not out yet.
But no, I feel like that's something that a lot of people need to hear, because like I said, we get very much there are so many books, and this book, especially now, because I spend a lot of time in the fantasy space because that's, what I write. And a lot of times it's very much like, this book needs to be a duology, or it needs to be a trilogy, or it needs to be so on and so forth. There's so many books in it. And I know that a lot of authors petition for more books in the series than what they signed for. So it's really nice to hear the other side of it, where it's just like, you're like, I have this book, this baby, this thing that I poured all my love and attention into, and I'm giving it to you, but I don't know when I'm going to be able to give you another one. And I feel like that's valid. There are 2 sides to every coin,
Yeah. I will say that because I enjoyed writing Finding Jupiter. It was kind of inspired, I could write when I felt like it, etc. Writing the second book, it's like a totally different experience. And I can honestly say, I am enjoying it. The story that needed to be told next did find me, right? And I'm in love with it. But writing to deadlines, obviously writing to something that you've already sold, it's a different kind of atmosphere. It's a different kind of creative space to be in. And I don't know that I would do it again. I think I had a friend who was already traditionally published, and when I got the 2-book deal, she was like, don't take the 2-book deal. Just sell the book that you wrote, she tried to save me from what I'm going through now. And and I honestly think in the future, I will sell the book that I have written. I don't think I would do a 2-book deal unless I've written 2 books.
I'm curious about that because, again, that is completely, I don't say countercultural, but it's countercultural for the moment where everyone's like, get as many book deals as you want. And, that's kind of this glowing standard, that's how you get to the pie in the sky, right? So I know that you said that you just wanted to sell the book that one at a time. So do you think that you'll ever write a series or a duology or things like that? Because I know in the romance space, what comes to mind is Christina Forrest, and how she'll have books that have the same characters in the same world, but it's 2 completely different books. They're still standalone.
Right. I do all my books, because right now the second book we're in revisions, and along the way I've got a spark of inspiration for a 3rd book. And so the next 2 books that come out are going to be, they will be Memphis romance novels. Same neighborhoods, same city, same universe, right? But different characters. There's a tiny bit of crossover. There's a little tiny bit of crossover so that, people who read Finding Jupiter might see things that they, can call back to in the follow-up books. But they all 3 books take place at the end of the school year through the summer. And so there's a little bit of crossover. So it could be a box set or something one day where, all the books are related, but they are standalones, not necessarily a series. If I were going to call it a series, it would just be Memphis, summer romance or something.
I mean, I still think that's cute. I think it's cute.
I think it's adorable. I wish they would give me a box set. That would be great.
Speak it into existence.
Yes.
That being said, if you guys are listening to this, you guys know that if you support the podcast and join the Patreon, then you do get access to these backstage interviews, so you can be here live with us while we're recording. And we do have a question from backstage, and it is, what do you think is the main advantage of writing your book before you have a contract?
The main advantage of writing the book before getting the contract, I feel like, the editor, both your agent and your editor, they know who they're getting. A huge advantage is knowing that, like, the follow-up book or whatever book comes next, my editor is not going to ask me for, paranormal, romance, or so it's kind of like the working relationship. Like, we know what it is. Like, that's the biggest advantage. They know who I am as a writer. They know what kind of messages I try to convey. And so the working relationship, I think, is off to a better start when you write the book beforehand.
That makes sense. It's like, the people that you're going to be working with know what to expect. They know what to see in your writing, and they can kind of, I don't say align themselves accordingly, but it's less like, I don't say writing into the dark, but...
Yeah, I actually have another thought about that, because now, because we're in revisions on the second book, which they had purchased beforehand, right? Mm-hmm. So a big thing the advantage of with Finding Jupiter, they saw it, they knew it, they loved it, they wanted to buy this story, mm-hmm. right? The second one, there's a little more feedback on the front end, mm-hmm. where the initial book that I turned in is not the book that I'm writing now, right? Mm-hmm. Because there's more input from the editor.
Gotcha.
At that time, I think the biggest thing that I can say that I don't think will be a huge spoiler is that when I turned the book in, it was a summer romance, because, I'm the summer romance, writer, right? Yeah. But it starts at prom, like the last week towards the end of the school year. So there was mm-hmm. one full week of school left, and then we went to the summer. And my editor and my agent were like, we love the story, we love the characters, the arcs, everything, but we really love that school scene. The week in school was so, electric, and we loved it. Mm-hmm. Why don't we move the entire story to the last 5 weeks of school?
Oh, wow.
But everything, it's a summer love story. So now, it was like a 60% rewrite,
I can see that.
Because now the setting is different. Mm-hmm. I can't, the two lovers can't be total strangers now. Like, they have to meet at the end of the school year. How am I going to do this? Et cetera, et cetera. So it was like huge rewrite, but it made the story better, and I'm grateful that I have a great editor and agent who can give me feedback that I'm open to. But I can say that was, for someone who already is a slower writer, mm-hmm. that has been a drawback. Yeah.
I guess I can see that. So that, I guess that kind of raises the question of, how do you kind of develop a relationship with your editor? Because, out in the world, those of us not, in traditional publishing, yeah. There's always these horror stories, of, you get a terrible editor who wants this and wants that. So how do you kind of balance that this is what I had in mind for the story with the feedback that you're getting? Is it a collaborative effort, or is it more so like, I'm asking you to do this, but it's really not a question?
Yeah, it's very much collaborative. I feel like on one level, I feel like I got really lucky with the editor who ended up buying my book, Phoebe Ye at Crown, Random House. And she's been in the industry for many decades, and she's kind of like, she has so much wisdom and knowledge and so much respect for authors. Mm-hmm. So, my book sold at auction, which means that I got to talk to all the editors who were interested, right? Mm-hmm. And when I talked to Phoebe, we kind of both understood that I'm a person who wrote the book of my dreams. Mm-hmm. And I would like to write more books, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm not a person, and I'm an older lady, I'm an older lady. I got kids, I have my life. But I want, I'm not a writer who like must put a book out every single year, and I'm chasing the, lists, and I'm, chasing fame and, all of these things. I'm not that writer. And I feel like I was able to communicate that to her, and she respected it. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, I think also because I'm not a writer who chases numbers and notoriety and things like that, it kind of tempers our conversations when we're talking about the work. I'm not shy about saying what I absolutely will not do, and I'm not shy about being honest. I feel like when you enter, a relationship like this, a huge business relationship, you have to be honest. You can't be afraid to step on toes. You can't be afraid to accept suggestions, right, from your editor and say, these are all great, but I don't like this. Mm-hmm. Like, my character I have certain things that my characters must do, must say that I'm unwilling to budge on. And my editor understands that. And it's kind of like some things end up being like a workaround where we figure out, okay, if you're really committed to keeping this in the book, it's way more important for you to love the book. This is what my editor told me. Mm-hmm. It's way more important for you to love the book than for me to love it, because you're the one who's going to have to talk about it the rest of your life and sell it and get other people to love it. So I never want to be in a position or a situation where I feel like I have to do something that I don't want to do. Honestly, I feel like most editors, I might be a little naive here, but if you're honest about, the work that you're submitting and how you want it to turn out, I feel like most editors will do a workaround, unless you're just the evil, human, which I don't think artists tend to be.
She said, unless you're an evil human. She did throw a clause in there. A little caveat for you guys.
I mean, some people are just hard to work with, but
that's true. Some people are difficult to work with. So, but I'm also glad that you mentioned that part about just, being honest about what it is and what your goals are and things are like that, because I feel like a lot of people, especially with authors, right, the conversation so very easily tends towards, I am chasing those things. I want the accolades. I want the numbers. I want the lists. I want the fame and the fortune, right? And I think it's really nice to hear that, you are doing this because this is something you enjoy, but it's not the end all be all everything for you. And I think it's important for anyone who's listening to this podcast to understand that it's okay if your goals are like that, and you don't have to be talked into making your ambitions bigger than what they are. It's perfectly fine if you're like, I'm here to write books, and I want to be able to write books and have a steady way and predictable way of doing that, and having the resources available to do it the way that, you want to, you know?
Yeah.
So, but that being said, in that same kind of vein, your book did come out in 2022 or in 2024. And I would kind of like to know, because, you mentioned that your editor, one thing also, if you're listening to this podcast, listen to that advice that her editor gave her about, you have to talk about this book for the rest of your life. Like, this is your book. You need to be proud of it, right?
Yeah.
So I guess my question becomes, how do you continue talking about your book in 2024 to keep it, top of mind for readers, especially when we live in a culture of everything is so fast, so quick. Yeah. Books come out, and then 3 months later, no one's talking about them anymore,
Yes.
How do you combat that?
I can tell you that this is something that I have had to light a candle. I have had to journal. I had to pray, because I'm aware of how quickly things move. The hardcover comes out. When the paperback comes out, they want the cover of the next one in the paperback. It's really fast. Again, I think I'm lucky that I went into it with everybody understanding that I don't write that fast. But I actually decided that it was really important for me to come up with ways to talk about Finding Jupiter that did not feel salesy and buy my book, everybody, every single day, to feel like it was relevant and to keep it front of mind between books. Before Finding Jupiter, before becoming a published writer, I am a hermit. I love solitude. I'm the person who, if we're in a physical space, someone calls on me to answer something, armpit sweat, physical shaking, like super stage fright. Like I'm a shy person. But with this book coming out, I knew I was going to have to talk about it. So I've really had to, push myself to do things that authors need to do to promote books. I, visited all the local bookstores, the independent bookstores especially, because they have a little more flexibility in how they can support writers. Mm-hmm. And I let them know, hey, I'm a local writer. I live here. My book has poetry and art. I can do these workshops for you. And I kind of established relationships locally with bookstores, and I joined the Texas League of Writers. Mm-hmm. And just to be in locally. I know a lot of stuff happens on social media. A lot of things happen online, but my life is here in Austin. Mm-hmm. And so I felt like if I could establish relationships, get invited to do in conversations with other authors whose books are coming out, join panels, accept every invitation for conferences and things like that, then I would have things to promote. I could say, hey, come see me here, or hey, this is a panel that I did, listen to it. Mm-hmm. Podcast interviews like this one. Anything that I could accept. And I prayed a lot and, journaled a lot and hoped that people would find my story compelling, my personal story, my actual novel compelling enough to kind of invite me to do things or to talk, Mm-hmm. That's how I'm still talking about Finding Jupiter 2 years out. I just had to come outside, way outside of my comfort zone.
I love that you mentioned that you took the initiative to go to bookstores and do things in person because, again, just interacting with people and things, the conversation usually tends towards you have to do things online. You have to do the whole bookstagram and influencer and do things, I'll say, widely versus being local. And I'm always a huge proponent of going to a local bookstore and being like, hey, I have a book. Can we work this out? Because like you mentioned, I also have found that independent bookstores are a lot more supportive than you would expect them to be going in, because we also hear the flip side of that, horror stories. There are a lot of horror stories in writing, you guys. I mean, go into it because you love it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's refreshing to hear that, you've kind of honed in on the things that you can do within your community to continue to support and uplift your career, and it's working. It's not just just throw things at the wall and see what sticks. It's no, there's a plan, there's intention behind it.
Absolutely. And it's also kind of supporting the kind of ecosystem of the independent bookstores in town. They, as much as I need them, they need me. It's kind of I establish these relationships where we both kind of benefit from the relationship. And there's a total different experience when I walk into a major chain bookstore, right? And ask to speak to the manager and let them know that I'm a local author and that I can do these workshops, etc. It's a different energy because an independent bookstore can decide. They can say, yes, we're going to do this. We'll put these resources toward it. What else do you got? Yeah. But a big box kind of store, they're kind of beholden to how many books they can really order and put on the shelf, whether they can order your book at all. There's more red tape. I have never felt the love and community and support from those larger places. They're just not set up to give that. And, as a debut author, I need it. I need to feel wanted and supported and relevant. So I go where I feel loved.
No, that's real. That's valid. And I feel like that's something that, authors everywhere, again, just need to really kind of sit with, especially when you start talking about, marketing your book and really where do you want to be? It's if you have to fight a store tooth and nail to get your book in there, do you really want to go in? Do you really want to send people there to spend their money to a store that doesn't actually want to support you? And there will be a time where you have to make that choice. There will be people who will be like, well, I'm willing to do X, Y, and Z, but it's very clear that they don't want to, and that they are giving you a boxed answer because they don't run the store and they have to give you that boxed answer, so there is discernment that goes into it. So if you're listening to this and you're like, but how, but why. It's just like, listen to your gut, because the thing is, if you don't want to be there, if you know that as a reader, right, you would go into that store, look around and be like, you know what, this isn't for me, I'm not buying anything from here, don't advocate to have your book in that store. That uphill battle is just not going to be worth it.
Yeah. And writing, hoping people will like what you write, hoping people will buy it. It's a hard occupation to be in, to create art and hope that people like it. The only thing you really have control over is creating the art,
Yep.
And so, yeah, definitely set your life up and set yourself up to feel good.
Absolutely.
About what you do, and to feel good about what you're putting out. Yeah. So yeah, don't spend a lot of energy forcing people to accept you. I don't want to ever feel like I'm editing myself in order to do what I think I'm supposed to do in order to attract readers, in order to attract, sellers, etc. When you get into a space where your focus is how to get these things that you have no control over, it can become a toxic experience, for you. And like I said, finding Jupiter, I'm grateful that I got a traditional publishing contract, and I only want to add nice things to my nice life. I had to quit working when I became a mom, and I don't want the work that I brought into my life to become an albatross of my neck, or like
Absolutely. Having balance in the things that you do, because I think it kind of ties into the other things that you were saying earlier as well about, not wanting to necessarily chase this big, extravagant career in that sense, right? And to have a balance, because I think when we start talking about, the necessity of having a book out every year that permeates the bookish and author community, right? I think people forget that you have to write these books, and then as authors, you put so much love and energy and time and effort into creating something, and then to have it be dismissed in like 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks, it's just kind of like that in and of itself is hard. And then people come to you after you've spent months, trying to craft something and put it out, a finished product, to be like, okay, well, where's the next one? And I think the fact that you're like, one, I don't want to chase that. I don't want to move at that speed, and having the self-awareness and the comfort with where you're at to be like, no, I don't want to move at the pace that everybody else is moving. This is the pace that I'm comfortable at. To say that and stand in that firmly, to the point where the people around you are like, okay, yes, we hear you, we can respect that, but also to say that, there are other things in your life that are important, and then you don't want this one thing that you brought into it voluntarily to eclipse everything else that it is that you're doing. I feel like that's valid, and it's something that, especially if you are at the beginning of your author career, if you're listening to this, it's something to consider how what you're building is going to fit into your life, because it does take a lot. And, depending on the other goals, because life is so much more than just a career and how hard you work. Even if you love the work that you're doing, life is a lot more than just that. So finding that balance,
Yeah. And I can honestly say, like, listening to you talk about that, I do want to add that if I had come into this career at a different stage of my life, like, I was a workhorse. When I had to stop working, I was devastated, because I'm a person, I find my purpose in my work historically. I just want to be a good worker and do a great job and get praise, right? That's my personality. Very Virgo, person. And so if I didn't have kids, for example, or a child who needed extra at the beginning of his life, I can totally see, having goals and wanting to crank a book out every year, and editing myself, doing what I need to do on social media, performing and being funny and all that. I can totally see making that my work, in order to have this life that I have decided that I want. You get a job, you do what's necessary to keep the job and to shine at the job and to do a good job. So I want to add to what you just said and to what I've been saying, that I understand that for me to say, I don't want to crank a book out every year, I want to be inspired, that's not my goal. I understand that I am speaking from a place of privilege. My books don't pay the bills. I was a stay-at-home mom. I'm not dependent on book sales for lifestyle or to live or to, So I understand that I'm privileged in that way. So when I say, I'm an artist about it, I hope it doesn't come off as, that other people should expect to have the same kind of attitude towards cranking books out and writing that next book.
Oh, yeah.
Because, it is a career. And for a lot of people, it does pay the bills,
Oh, yeah. And I will say this, you guys, if you're listening to the podcast, if this is your first one, first of all, welcome. Glad you made it. But if it's also like, this is a safe space, right? Because everybody has their own journey, and every journey is not going to look the same. Every journey does not have the same parameters to work within. So I 100% understand where you're coming from. It's something that I personally also have to kind of wrestle with and keep in mind. It's a kind of a disclaimer of, it's like, yes, it is very privileged to be able to say that I do this because I want to and for fun, versus, yeah, if your writing is paying the bills, then you do have to take a different approach to it, right? So I'm going to give the blanket statement that if the shoe doesn't fit, don't wear it.
Absolutely.
If this doesn't apply to you, then understand that it doesn't apply to you. This is just a different perspective for you to keep in mind, and also something to keep in mind if you are in a position where it does have to pay the bills, but you want to get to a point where it's just like, I want to be able to set my own boundaries and set my own pace. It's something to consider, right? Because it's just like, these are the realities and the parameters that come with it. With every option, there are pros and cons that come with it. So, if it's not paying your bills, that's great. You can do the art for the sake of art. But it's also like someone's paying your bills, and that comes with a whole different set of, I don't say problems, it's a whole different ball game, right? So, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because like I'm also married. My husband is the one who carries our household. So I'm also very fortunate and privileged to be like, I'm able to write books the way that I would like to write books. However, for anyone who's listening, a little bit of humor, hee hee ha ha. Being married to another person is difficult. It just being like, oh yeah, I'm a chill. It's work.
It's different.
As much as you love your life, there are moments where you're just like, you know what? Whew, choices were made. They got us here.
Choices were made, yes.
All that to say that I want to make it very clear that if you guys are listening to the podcast, I love Ben. He's great. Y'all know that he's always on the channel and the podcast. So please do not take this joke further than it's meant. If he knows that it's a joke, so chill.
Yeah.
Right? Just throwing that out there.
Yeah. Kids, I have a teenager and a toddler, and I've been married. I've been with my husband almost 30 years. Like we were in it.
Yeah.
Having a family, it can have, an effect on the life of an artist. I'll say that, because if you can imagine, like I said, I was a stay-at-home mom for 12 years before I published, before I sold it. And so, now I've sold a book. I have to edit. I have to travel. I have obligations that pull me away from the family and away from this life that we've become accustomed to. Mm-hmm. And that, it takes a toll, and it changes dynamics. And yeah, it adds a whole other animal to this thing called life.
Another layer. And it takes work on both ends, like that. And I think that's the point that we're trying to make. Like, whatever situation you find yourself in, it takes work on both sides of the coin.
Yeah.
But all that being said, redirecting, refocusing a little bit back to the books. I would like to know, what would you personally say are like the pillars of a really good YA romance? Because you're the summer romance writer, right? Your words.
Ooh, pillars of a really good YA romance. I have to say it's important for the love interest and for the main character to have goals that are independent of each other. It's kind of like, even when we look at adult romances, it's like you want to meet characters who kind of already have a life going on. Mm-hmm. They're already on a trajectory towards something, and it just makes the story more interesting than when the characters just kind of letting life happen to them, kind of. But I don't think we'll find a book like that, because most editors push against that kind of story anyway. But so yeah, two characters who are kind of fully on their paths. What else? You know, we love a sweet boy in YA, or even a boy who's rough on the outside and soft in the middle. Like sweetness, you know, is important. Sweetness in the male character. You know, I see a lot of people talk about how unrealistic sometimes, you know, these kinds of male characters are. I disagree. I disagree. Sweet boys are out here, you know, making girls swoon in real life, right? So, yeah, sweetness. What else? I love music. One of the things that I love about Nicola Yoon's, like music and poetry and art, about her writing is that, you know, she incorporates music moments, even if it's karaoke, those kind of light, fun moments, especially for Black American teenagers. I like to see them like frolic and have fun. Yeah, pointless fun.
Oh yeah, gotta have some frolicking, and it doesn't have to be literal frolicking through the grass, but moments where it's just like they can breathe, and I think that's important for any romance, whether it's an actual romance novel or if it's just a romance subplot in a different genre. You need a moment for the characters to just be like, you know what, this isn't so bad. I actually kind of like you. You know?
Yeah, easy and breezy fun. Like my favorite moments are like when two characters are maybe just walking to the convenience store together, or like, downtime.
Downtime. I love it. So that being said, you know, you have Finding Jupiter and you're working on another novel. Is there anything more that you could tell us about the other novel, or when to expect it possibly, or?
Right now, it's not in copy edits yet. I can say some things. Most likely it'll be out in 2026.
Okay.
But this next one, it's another love story. Like I said, it takes place the last 5 weeks of school. The characters, what can I say about this book? I'm not even ready to talk about it. The overarching theme, where Finding Jupiter, it was kind of an examination of the love relationships between fathers and teens and how it affects the way they show up in life with friendships and love relationships. So it's kind of like a paternal love examination. This next book it takes a look at perfectionism, the kind of the darker side of perfectionism, and the masks that teenagers wear sometimes just to survive. And when I say survive, I mean emotionally, spiritually, internally, to survive. The things that teenagers will take on sometimes because they feel pressure to uphold their family's happiness, their friends' happiness, in sacrifice of their own. So it's kind of it's another, literary novel. It deals with some heavy topics surrounding perfectionism, self-harm, suicide. But in that, there is, a thread of joy, of always, how plants kind of grow to the light, of always reaching for joy. And, life can't be always joyful, but we can always be looking for opportunities to grow towards joy. And as teenagers, this is why I write for teenagers. Teenagers don't, sit up and say, I feel so deep in despair, let me reach towards joy, So I write these books to kind of give them an example or framework to say, I should definitely, tell somebody what I'm going through, or it's okay for me to trust that my best friend really does love me, Yeah.
I love it. I'm excited for it. I'm looking forward to it. And if you guys listening to this are into YA romance, be sure to keep an eye out for it and get into Finding Jupiter. But that being said, we are coming up on the 45-minute mark. So I have 2 more questions for you, and then I will wrap this up. The first one is, if you could choose what lasting effect that your writing would have on people, what would it be?
The lasting effect that I would hope my books will have on readers, on publishers, on editors, on teenagers, is to walk away with the sense that Black American teenagers' existence is enough. Their stories of love and, triumph and perseverance are enough. They don't have to quantify or qualify their Blackness or their life experience with being framed around, persevering against racism or persevering against in the face of, some kind of social unrest.
Mm-hmm.
That's the overarching theme I want people to walk away with. Like, this story was really good because these characters, are great because they're strong in Blackness, not because they persevered through, this racial struggle, but because I saw the humanity in these characters and I connected to them.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. So I'm not going to add anything to that. I'm just going to ask you this final question. What writing advice would you give to any new authors just starting out on their writing journey?
Write what you love. Write what you love. Don't write what you think is popular. Don't write what you think will sell. Don't write for any other reason other than you have this great story and these great characters that you want to play around with and live with forever.
I support that.
Yeah.
I support that. You have to be your biggest fan of your work.
Yeah. And what a letdown will it be if you wrote, vampire romance, because that's what's popular now. But 4 years from now, when your book is out, nobody cares about vampire romance. Write what you love.
Yeah. And, as Kelis said earlier in the interview, it's like, you're going to have to talk about this book forever. So you should love it. You should be really proud of it that your name is on the cover.
Absolutely.
But that being said, will you let the people know where to find you on the interwebs?
Find all things Kelis Rowe and Finding Jupiter at kelisrowe.com. On social media, I'm at the THEE Kelis Rowe everywhere on social media.
There we go.
Yeah.
And you guys know that there will be a link in either the description box or the show notes, wherever you're listening to this at. And yeah, that is it for this episode of the Written in Melanin podcast, you guys. If you'd like to support this podcast, then please share it with someone you think may enjoy it. Join the Patreon at patreon.com/writteninmelanin, or grab a copy of my books from my website, cmlockhart.com, or from Resist Booksellers in Petersburg, Virginia. That being said, there are links in the show notes for everything, and thank you guys again so much for listening. Until next time, I hope all your books are full of melanin.